You're listening to a podcast from DCT Audio. I'm Dave Thomas, and I've been producing audio content for over 10 years. Thank you for listening to this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Miguel. I'm a shaman, I'm a Munai mentor, I'm a radio presenter, and I'm a generally nice guy.
Miguel Da Silva, welcome to today's podcast. I think it's fair to say that you've had a varied and interesting childhood. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Hello, Dave. Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me on the podcast. Yeah, my childhood has been interesting, I think is the word to use. I was born in 1965 in Lisbon, Portugal, just in the shadow of the Benfica football stadium. The early years are quite difficult for me to actually either consciously remember or actually know much about it. My sort of memories, and from what I've been told, go from the age of 2 onwards. So my dad was an officer in the Portuguese army, and he was stationed to Angola, which is on the western coast of Africa, and he was the commanding officer on a military base there. From what I know is that I was a bit of a troublemaker. I used to get up very early in the morning as a 2-year-old, go into the mess hall, and there was a drum kit set up there, and I used to climb behind that drum kit, find the drumsticks, and beat everything out of it, waking up the whole camp at about 5 o'clock in the morning. My mother told me this, that one day I actually jumped into a big barrel of engine oil.
Oh, Lord.
And covered myself head to toe in engine oil. That time in Angola, at the age of 2, really marked the beginning of where I am now. My childhood was really marked with moving very often from country to country and experiencing things that really a child should not have to experience. I experienced the revolution in Portugal on the 25th of April 1974, being at school and remembering hearing the tanks roll past the school into the center of Lisbon. Now, it was a very interesting revolution because no shots were fired and nobody was killed, but the dictator was deposed. There's an interesting story about the revolution that it got started by playing a specific song on national radio, which then was the signal for the tanks to roll out of their barracks into the city. Later on, after the revolution in Portugal, we went to the Netherlands. My dad was married to a Dutch woman, where my dad had got a job in insurance. That's where I had my early school. I went to primary school there for a couple of years. And generally, it wasn't too unhappy. We lived in a town just outside of The Hague, and that town was called Zoetermeer. I sort of had those first formative years in the Netherlands, and everything seemed okay. I knew that my parents were forced into marriage because my mom fell pregnant with me as a result of a one-night stand with my dad. And at that time, in the mid-1960s, especially in Portugal, the done thing was you need to marry this woman, look after her. So my mom was basically forced to give up all her hopes and dreams and everything that she worked for to move to Portugal, marry my dad, and give birth to me, and then go to Angola with my dad. When we went back to the Netherlands, and I had this fairly normal few years as a child, then my dad decided we're going to go back to Portugal. That was quite difficult for me because going from the Netherlands, which is a completely different society, to a closed country like Portugal was, very religious, very strict, I had trouble adapting. And I became a little bit more of a troublemaker, always getting into mischief. Then my dad got his job in the Netherlands. We moved back to the Netherlands. At one point, something snapped in me. I'm not sure what it was or how it happened, but something just snapped. I suddenly started looking at my dad in a different light, in a different way. That was kind of like a lack of respect for him. Maybe at that age I started thinking, why can't we be settled in one place? Why do we have to move around all the time to different countries? And every time I made some friends, then you'd lose them and you'd have to start all over again. After the revolution, after we went to the Netherlands, we went back to Angola. My dad got a job as a secretary to the Portuguese ambassador in Angola. And we had a beautiful house on top of a hill right next to the ambassador's mansion. Looking down from that hill, there were the shanty towns. I always wanted to go down because that's where my friends were. And my dad just forbade me from going there. I didn't understand why. Because they were people, they were human beings. In my opinion, they were my friends. Now, at that time, Angola was still a Portuguese colony. And whilst we were there, Portugal relinquished their colonial power, which caused a power vacuum in the country. And a civil war broke out. And there was 3 parties fighting for control. Now, the power eventually went to the MPLA. And they took control of the country. It became quite what you would now describe as a far-right regime. The Civil War was still going on. I remember being in school and having to hide under the desk because bullets were flying through the classroom. At night, you'd hear the machine guns go off. And I remember my mum having to go to the market to buy bread and standing in a queue for 6 hours just to get 1 loaf of bread. Whilst we were there, I caught malaria. And I was very close to death because medication was very difficult to get hold of. Eventually, they managed to get the medication to treat the malaria, and I survived, but I was very close to actually not surviving. My mom made the decision that we had to leave the country, and my dad, because he had worked for the Portuguese government, had to flee the country. So he fled to Brazil, which was the normal thing to do, Brazil being very friendly with Portugal. And he stayed there for, I think, about 2 or 3 years. My mom had already made the decision that she would never take us to Brazil. And I'm glad that she did, actually. We lived in the Netherlands with my Dutch grandparents. And my mom lived there as well. So there was the 3 of us, my mom, my sister, myself, and my grandfather and my grandmother in a small house. But my grandfather took on the role as my father, if you like. I was very close to him. He basically started to tell me stories and give me books. You know, all the great books like Treasure Island, Gulliver's Travels, you know. And I devoured those books. I absolutely loved them. He was what I wanted my dad to be. Then my dad came back from Brazil. And we moved out of The Hague to a little village in the countryside. I was put in a school I didn't want to be in and where I was bullied because of what I experienced in Angola. And I couldn't adapt. You know, by that time I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. My school education started to suffer. Once I went to secondary school in the Netherlands, it became a huge problem because I wasn't academic at all. Also, I didn't really like doing my homework, as most people don't, but I actually flatly refused to do my homework with lots of subjects. So school started to suffer, and my dad had certain ideas of what I would become. He became very domineering in a sense. You know, if I didn't do something that he wanted me to do, he would hit me. And this also came into play with his religious belief. He was a very Catholic man, and he forced us to go to church with him. And I remember clearly at the age of 14, he was getting ready to go to church on Sunday, and I wasn't. And he said to me, "We're going to church." I said, "I'm not." And he said, "You are." I said, "No, I'm not." And he hit me. And I looked at him, and I hit him back. And I said, "I'm not going to church. I don't believe in that stuff." That was the moment, I think, that he stopped talking to me. To me, he was kind of more like a distant uncle than my father. And my granddad, still alive at that time, took his place. So whenever I felt I needed to talk to someone, I would turn to my grandfather. It was very difficult for me in the Netherlands, adapting to the society. I had the problems with my parents, and my escape at the age of 14 was alcohol and drugs. I'm talking cannabis. And it was freely available, as you well know. Coffee shops in Amsterdam were easy to get to. So I would go there maybe twice a week and I would stock up on cannabis. And combined with alcohol, I would drown my sorrows or smoke my sorrows away, if you like. And the friends that I got as a result weren't exactly the best people to hang around with. And it caused a lot of problems within my family. And my dad's suggestion was to send me to boarding school, which was probably the worst decision he could have made. So I was sent to boarding school in one of the most religious parts of the Netherlands. And I later found out there were stories of pedophilia and child abuse there. I don't know if I was the victim of it. I don't think I was. But a lot of the boys there were the victims of this sexual abuse. So I ran away and I ended up in The Hague. I found a place where they would support children who ran away from home. And I stayed there for a few weeks and then moved into a squat, which was exciting. It was fun for the 2 days that I stayed there. And then we got kicked out by the neighborhood. I was kind of forced to go back home. And my dad then decided to send me to Portugal. I wasn't even living with family. I was put in a small hotel in the center of Lisbon. I found myself completely alone in a country I didn't want to be in, and I soon discovered where to get cannabis. That became my escape. And literally most of my money actually went on cannabis and forgetting what I was doing there. In that time, I discovered Radio Caroline. That was the first moment of joy that I remember from around that time. Discovering Radio Caroline, listening to those voices from the North Sea, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know how, but I knew I wanted to be one of these guys sitting on a ship broadcasting music. When my time in Portugal was up, and it felt like a prison sentence, I went back to the Netherlands and I joined a pirate radio station, which had a range of about 2 streets down the block. So probably about, I don't know, maybe about 200 meters or something like that. But it was fun. And that's where I kind of learned the basics of what I do now as a radio presenter. I then ended up living in Brussels with my dad. When I had the opportunity, I disappeared from Brussels, went back to the Netherlands. I think that was the time both my parents let go of their responsibility for me. I remember my dad saying to me, because I used to take drugs, I was not his son. But the happiness I found was in joining the local radio station. And I started to learn about radio from professionals in the business, because there were people working at that station who ended up or were working for the national stations. But the drugs were still there. When I was probably around 18 years old, I moved to The Hague, where I ended up in my first proper shared house. Not a squat, a proper house share. And I had freedom, but it did come at a cost. My parents didn't really care. My family in Portugal didn't care. So I was pretty much on my own, but The Hague was the place that I knew, and my grandparents lived there. And I joined a local radio station there called Locatel Radio. That was a lot of fun. I ended up actually covering for the breakfast show, which was a massive thing for me because Locatel Radio was on a local cable network and had somewhere around 1.5 million listeners. So it was huge for me. In that time, I started writing to this girl from England as pen friends, and we wrote regularly, and she came over to the Netherlands. We hit it off. We got together. And in 1988, I actually moved to the UK. Coming to the UK was difficult. I didn't expect to still be here after all these years. I got married to her, and we had a daughter between us, but the relationship became a bit strained. So we separated and divorced. I found myself alone again in a country where I really didn't know that many people, even though I'd been here for a while. even at one point ended up living at the YMCA in Ipswich. And the relationship with my daughter was affected by that as well, especially when they moved and it was a bit more difficult for me to go and visit her. And my personal circumstances were that I was down in a very deep hole. And I couldn't really give what I would like to have given to my daughter at the time. She's now grown up and I'm very proud of what she's achieved, but I was never her dad. I was her father, biological father. My ex-wife, she remarried, and the guy she married became my daughter's dad. It does hurt thinking about that, but ultimately it was the best for her. She had someone there she could rely on. I moved around a lot in the UK, and my mom had also moved to the UK, and they lived in Devon, just on the edge of Dartmoor. That is when I started to heal my relationship with my mom, and we started talking about the past. I met someone. She turned out to be not the easiest person to be with, but we had a son together. And as soon as my son was born, she basically said that she didn't need me anymore and I should just go back to the Netherlands. So it was kind of like a pattern that I'd seen previously in my life was repeating itself again. I did meet in Southend the woman who became my second wife, and I was married to her for about 20 odd years. We separated in 2024, October, and we divorced, which actually led me to being where I am now, in Colchester. One of the things that came very early in my life was my interest in the paranormal. So UFOs, tarot, all of that sort of stuff. And whilst I was living in Ipswich, I met a lady who was a clairvoyant medium. She came up to my counter at Boots and wanted to buy cassettes. So that's showing you how long ago it was, blank cassettes to record meditation music. So I said, well, I like meditation music. And we talked a bit, and then she said, well, I'm a medium. And I replied, I know. I don't even know where that came from. And the next thing she said was, do you want to join my spiritual development circle? I said, well, what's a development circle? And she took me on, and I learned about meditation and realized that I had certain abilities, which I started to use. I started to do readings for people. I even did what they call platform work in spiritualist churches for a short while. One evening I was standing there looking at the people and thinking, how's this really helping them? You know, it's all good and well knowing that Auntie Flo is still alive, but how is it helping that person? That is when shamanism hit me again.
Well, I was going to ask you, what is shamanism?
Okay, so let's go there first, okay? In simple terms, it is actually one of the oldest spiritual practices known to humanity, and it's found across cultures in every continent, from Siberia to South America, from West Africa to the Pacific. It's everywhere. At its core, shamanism is based on the understanding that reality is not just what we can see and what we can touch, that alongside the ordinary reality, there are other layers of existence, often called non-ordinary reality, the spirit world, or other realms, other dimensions. And certain people have the ability to navigate between those worlds. The shaman is basically a bridge. They can shift their consciousness through either drumming, breath work, plant medicine, or other methods to move between those worlds to gather information, find healing, retrieve lost energy, or communicate with spirit guides, ancestors, or even the forces of nature. And when they return from those journeys, they bring something back, healing, a changed perspective, either for themselves or for the person they work with. When people mention shamanism, they go, oh yeah, you're one of those weird guys who wears feathers on his head and goes into the jungle and drinks strange brews. Well, no, that is not the truth. When people see me and I say I'm a shaman, they go, really? You don't look like one. And I say, well, what's a shaman supposed to look like? I'm an ordinary guy who happens to be a shaman. And within my community, I always say I'm the most unconventional of shamans because I also present radio shows where I play music. What does a shaman actually do? And it actually varies by tradition to tradition, but the common thread is always working with illness at its energetic or spiritual root, not just treating the physical symptoms. We can retrieve parts of a person, we call it soul retrieval, that has been lost through traumas, which I personally had that experience with. We can work with the ancestors and those that have passed on. We can interpret dreams, and we can look at the natural signs as to what's going on in the world. A shaman also acts as a keeper of community memory and teaches to be in the right relationship with the land, with the world around you. Now, shamanism is not a belief system. You don't have to have a certain belief. It's an experiential thing. You know because you experience it within yourself. And that can make changes in your life, really deep changes. So if we put it into a modern context, that shamanism has moved well beyond its indigenous origins now. Many practitioners today, including those who work with the Peruvian Q'ero lineage, which is what I work with, work on a one-to-one basis with individuals, helping them to process trauma, reconnect with themselves, and find clarity at major crossroads in life. The tools are ancient, but the way that we work is actually very contemporary. We use ancient teachings that have been around for thousands of years maybe, but we translate them into modern terms. Shamanic journeying, which is a method of actually going within yourself, is visualization in normal contemporary psychiatry. Conventional therapy works with the mind, and medicines work with the body. Shamanism works with the parts of a person that they can't really reach. The energetic, the ancestral, the spiritual dimension of who we actually truly are. That is, in short, really shamanism and what I personally do. It has helped me to overcome many of the issues that I carried from my past.
I think you said to me previously that everything we need to heal ourselves is within ourselves.
Yeah.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about that.
You can see it as profoundly true and potentially misleading, depending how it's understood. Now, from a psychotherapeutic perspective, healing ultimately happens inside a person. No therapist, no healer on this planet can heal a client. No shaman can heal a client. No medicine, ritual, or technique can do the inner work on someone else's behalf. At some point, healing involves an internal process, awareness, acceptance, integration, meaning-making, and change. In that sense, the capacity to heal is already present within us. If you look at psychology, it has repeatedly observed that human beings possess remarkable resilience, often discovering strengths they never knew they had. The therapist's role is not to fix the person, but to create the conditions in which the person's own healing intelligence can emerge. And shamanism arrives at a similar conclusion through a different language. Many traditions speak of soul loss, imbalance, forgotten gifts, or disconnection from spirit. The healing journey is not usually about becoming something new. It's about remembering what has been forgotten and reclaiming what has been lost. The medicine is often described as a return to wholeness rather than the acquisition of something external. It's all good and well, but this can also be a bit problematic, because if you take it literally, it can imply that people should be able to heal entirely on their own. Human beings are relational creatures. We heal in relationship with other people, with nature, with community, with ancestors, with spirit, and sometimes with skilled professionals. A seed contains everything it needs to become an oak tree, but it would still need soil, water, sunlight, and time to grow. Likewise, a person may possess the innate capacity for healing, but they need the support to access it. So they need someone to kind of water them, make sure they're in the right soil. The shaman, therapist, elder, friend, or teacher does not provide the healing itself. They provide the conditions in which the healing can occur. They're more like guides than mechanics, I suppose. And there's also a deeper shamanic layer to this idea. Many indigenous traditions see illness not merely as a problem to eliminate, but as a messenger. Symptoms may point towards parts of ourselves that have been neglected, wounded, or silenced. Healing then becomes less about fighting something and more about listening. The wisdom required for the next step often emerges from within once we become quiet enough to hear it. So perhaps a more complete statement would actually be the capacity for healing lives within us, but we often need the support of others, the wisdom of nature, and the guidance of spirit to uncover it. And that view honors both psychotherapy and shamanism. It recognizes the sovereignty of the individual, while acknowledging that healing is rarely a solitary act. We carry the spark, but sometimes we need others to help us find where the fire is hidden.
You have a remarkable life experience, I have to say. We know each other as fellow presenter DJs on Radio Big Sky, and I'm just wondering, what does music mean to you? I ask that specifically from the point of shamanism, I suppose.
Well, music means pretty much everything to me, because music can invoke emotions. It can make you laugh, can make you smile, can make you cry. For me, music is feeling. You know, if I listen to the music that's out today, and you'll probably agree with me on that, there is no soul in that music. There's no feeling in it. It's all electronic without that energy that we are used to. Now, to give an example, my favorite band is Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd doesn't do anything by light measures. It's all very deep, emotional, complex music with meaning. And that was the music that really hit me when I was about 14 years old when I discovered Pink Floyd. So music can change something within you. And if you listen to not my lunchtime show, but the Monday evening show, the music I play is specifically music that has feeling and soul in it, to evoke something, to bring something up. So I'm even playing the Shaman on the radio, even though people don't realize that that's what I'm actually doing. Without music, I think my life would have been very boring. The first band I actually was allowed to listen to, because growing up in Portugal, pop music was not allowed on national radio, so I never got to hear the Beatles on the radio and all of that. That happened when we moved to the Netherlands. And the first band that I encountered when I was about 10 or 11 or so, I hate to admit this, but was ABBA. I got really heavily into ABBA because it was pop music, and it did do something to me. I used to drive my mum crazy by playing Iron Maiden at full volume. I remember that, Run to the Hills and all of that. In my family, especially in the Portuguese side of the family, one of my uncles was a jazz musician, and he recently passed away, but he was responsible for bringing jazz music to Lisbon. He was very instrumental in opening up the Hot Club of Portugal, which is the equivalent of, Ronnie Scott's in London. That opened my eyes or my ears to other types of music, and I started listening to other prog rock, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Barclay James Harvest, all of those bands that a lot of people now go, who, what? But it always invoked a feeling in me. And that is what I found important.
I tell you a band that, while we're talking about music, and we could go on all day about music.
Yes, we could, yes.
But one of the best bands that never made it for me were Magnum.
Magnum, I remember Magnum. Yeah, they're still around, I believe.
Great band. And I think all these bands that you've mentioned, they have a longevity, whereas modern bands, they're here today, gone tomorrow, and you can grow with the band and see how they progress. And like Genesis is a classic example, their first album to their last album, and how they're musically they have changed, and it's definitely a journey.
It is. I mean, even with Pink Floyd, David Gilmour still recording music at the age of 84, I think he is. And still making absolutely amazing music that could well be classed as Pink Floyd to a certain degree.
Before we bore our audience to death, but talking about music, I suppose finally, I'm going to ask you this question because it is a question that takes a bit of thinking to provide an appropriate answer. So, with all your experiences throughout your life, has there been a single moment where you've learned more about yourself than at any other time?
Well, I sat with that question. I'll tell you what, it's the longest I sat with the question for a very long time. I came to this answer. I think it was the time about 6 months after my separation that I realized that I didn't need anyone other than myself to be happy with my life and with myself. I had become very comfortable with the thought that my happiness depended on someone else or on something else. And I lived in the illusion that happiness could only be found with someone else, when in truth it has to come from within. And once I accepted that, I could truly be happy with myself, with my own company, with my own decisions, and everything literally changed. It didn't mean that the problems I had simply vanished or were ignored. It meant I was my whole self and not dependent on people or situations outside of myself. Shamanism helped me to come to that answer. I mentioned earlier that I used the principles of my shamanic work to get over the grief of the separation and the divorce. And it made me realize that the construct that I work with, which is the medicine wheel, is more than just a circle shape with 4 directions on it. It made me realize that actually the medicine wheel helped me, taking me through all those stages to get to where I am now, to get to the point that I'm happy with myself. The medicine wheel, the south direction is ruled by the serpent energy, and it's all about shedding your past the way that the serpent sheds its skin. And once you shed that skin, you let it go. You don't hang on to it. And that's one thing I had to learn. You go to the west direction, which is ruled by the jaguar energy. And the jaguar energy, first of all, teaches you to become top of the food chain, not to become victim. And it teaches you to look at your own shadow. So that those aspects of you don't want to look at. I was forced to do that very clearly. Then the north direction is the hummingbird energy, which is often seen as magic and joy. And it is true, it's magic and joy, but it's not the handing out on your plate kind of magic and joy. You have to work for it. And I had to find the magic and the joy in situations I was placed in, including with a very dodgy landlord, and having to deal with that, and still finding the magic and the joy, i.e. the strength to go through that and not to be pushed down by it. And then we have in the east direction, we have the eagle and the condor. And that is about looking at the situation from a higher perspective. So you have an overview of the whole situation. And using those principles helped me to deal with my personal issues. It helped me to overcome my marriage of 22 years. It helped me to overcome addiction issues as well. Not saying I'm a saint, but the use of cannabis has completely stopped. Smoking has stopped. I don't drink very often. I don't actually like it that much anymore. And I feel much more confident within myself. I feel more whole, if you like. Now, I've been walking the medicine wheel for about 12 years now, initially as a student and then as a teacher. And I do this alongside my working partner, Gareth. He will appreciate that I give him a mention. We've been working together on the medicine wheel, teaching it to people, and we do introductory courses, foundation course, which teaches people how the medicine wheel actually works.
If people want to find out more about what you're doing, is there a website or something they can visit?
I haven't got a website, but I've got a Facebook page, which is probably the easiest way to contact me, which is facebook.com/thehealingpathways. And if people message me on there, I will always reply. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody who feels that shamanism could help them. You know, I work as a healer. I do remote healings, which initially I was a bit skeptical about, but they work. And also I teach, and I'm developing a course that gives people access to the medicine wheel after 12 months of training with me. And that course is going to be launched in the very near future. But it's an interesting thing. You know, the medicine wheel and shamanism fits perfectly in 2026. It's that old knowledge, those old traditions, those old values, I suppose, that we're lacking today, and which I believe are at the core of many of societal problems that we see today. You know, that children haven't got the guidance that they need a lot of the time. That there has been a marked increase in case of autism, for example. Why is that? There's an increase of people with mental health problems. You know, why is that? It's the pressures of the world around us. And shamanism offers a way through those, a way in which people can find themselves again. There's an Aboriginal saying that is, when you lose yourself, you need to go on a walkabout. And then the ones that go on the walkabout, they just walk, physically walk, until they meet themselves somewhere along the way. And then they start to heal properly. I had to do that in a roundabout way, not physically walking, but it was in my head, I suppose, trying to figure out where am I, what do I actually want. All of that is Miguel. All of that forms who I am. It's brought me to where I am today, and I'm incredibly grateful to be in a place that I can say, yes, I've been there, I've done it, and this is who I am. I don't have to hide myself behind a mask anymore. I don't have to worry about whether my dad likes me or not, or whether my mum is still got issues with me or not. It's just that everything happened as it had to happen. It led me to where I am today, and that is what I'm incredibly grateful for.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
It has been.
Miguel Da Silva, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
DCT Audio. The art of good listening.